Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, adnistana. This segment of Points of Light Radio, I will be interviewing Abby Burnett. This is a follow-up to the Woodmen of the World segment I did last year here on Points of Light Radio. And she has some interesting follow-up information on the Woodmen of the World. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring you this segment. This was kind of an ad hoc interview I did with her earlier, and I'm just going to release it to you uncut. It was actually quite an interesting conversation I had with her. So let's move forward, shall we?
Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Okay. Abby Burnett, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I understand that you are on the preservation of cemeteries and memorials. You are, on some of the historical societies, and you are passionate, as I understand it, about the preservation of cemeteries and memorials in Arkansas. Is that true?
I'm sorry. The recording, something just cut out for a minute there. I'm a member of the Association for Gravestone Studies, which is a national organization.
Okay.
And I have been a member of the Preserving African American Cemeteries,
okay.
But I haven't heard from them in a long time. I hope they're still active.
Yeah, but now, what you're here to discuss today, though, is the discoveries you've made about the Woodmen of the World, their headstones and so on, their grave sites. What did you discover about them?
Oh, I don't know that I've made any discoveries. I am very interested in fraternal lodges.
Okay.
And all fraternal lodges. I mean, obviously everybody knows the Masons and the Oddfellows.
Yes.
But the more time I spend in cemeteries, which is a considerable amount of time, the more I started finding these symbols, and in trying to trace back what everything meant, I discovered I was looking at an enormous number of different fraternal lodges that left behind their insignias on their members' tombstones. The Woodmen of the World are probably the best known in that their tree trunk emblems are found across the country, and I think pretty much anybody who's been in a cemetery has probably seen at least one or more examples of the Woodman marker.
No way. Now, you said some of them were literally tree stumps.
Well, they're carved in stone to represent tree stumps, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I should also say that there was a time, I think in the late 1800s or early 1900s, where there was this fad for things being rustic. And rustic meant having tree bark. So there are cemeteries that have got stumps, stone furniture, various things made or like curbs around a cemetery plot that look like they're wood when they're actually made of stone, and they have nothing to do with the woodmen. They were simply part of a fad for putting tree bark on things.
Now, you said there was kind of a unique ceremony to a woodman.
Unveiling, yes. Yes. Well, when a woodman died, especially if he was the sovereign of a camp, the leader of a camp, the stone would be made, sometimes the size of an actual tree trunk minus the limbs. And when it was delivered, they would put a piece of fabric over it, a veil. And then they would have a very elaborate ceremony where the fellow woodmen would kneel and hold ceremonial axes, and they would sort of fan out from the base of the stump of the tree trunk in the shape of a wedge, because the woodman insignia involves an axe, a splitting maul, and a wedge. And they would hold their axes. In some of these unveilings, there would be poems, music, sermons. If the man had a widow or an orphan, the family would be there, and then they would remove this piece of fabric, and the stone would be unveiled. And then, of course, from then on, it was part of the woodsman's creed, I think, in a sense, to keep decorating those stones. So once a year, the woodman would go and decorate the graves of fellow woodmen.
Wow. And you said there were differences in the headstones themselves
Yes.
adults versus children.
No, no, really, children. I hope I don't know if where that came from. It's very rare for a woodman to insure a child. Children were cheap to bury. The little stumps that you see that might have a lamb or a dove with a broken wing that are for children are not the graves of children of woodmen of the world unless the woodman's insignia is on it. So the little tree stump is again part of that sort of rustic movement. And there are lots of little stumps and logs for children, but they're not necessarily woodmen of the world markers. It
Okay.
gets confusing.
No, that's fine. And you said they put different symbols on them, things like grapes and things like that, or
They could, yes. In the beginning, I think the woodmen of the world tried to provide the tombstone, but very quickly they realized they could simply provide patterns. And then the local carvers kind of took these patterns and ran with it. So
okay.
while they might do the tree trunk for the man or the woman, they might add details. And when you get there's a very very fine grain of limestone that allowed carvers to put very small details. So in certain parts of the country, you can find these tree trunks, and they're not, again, some of them are just from the rustic movement, not necessarily woodman markers, but you can find these tree trunks where they'll carve a knot hole and there'll be like a chipmunk peering out of it, or they'll carve tree fungus on the side, or a vine and tendril, grapes, or the man's tools of a man's trade might be leaning up against the base of the tree trunk. So those tree trunk markers, and there are a lot of them around Kansas City. Those tree trunk markers are wonderful to find because you never know what you're going to see in addition to the regular tree trunk itself.
Wow. Now you said you were interested in fraternalism itself. Are you a member of any of the fraternal orders
No.
yourself? No.
No, I'm not. I'm not much of a joiner, but and a lot
It
of
is
the
fascinating.
lodges, well, a lot of the lodges I'm interested in have died out. They're very. There's no one really knows how many lodges existed in their heyday, which was between the end of the Civil War and the Depression.
Yes.
A lodge might be founded in a small town. It didn't have, it never really grew. It died out. So you can find things on tombstones and not really know what the lodge was. It left behind a mark. It left behind a symbol, but you don't always know. So there may have been as many as 2 or 3, 4,000 different lodges at one time, and
Yeah,
most of these are gone.
yeah, it is. And independent bodies, side orders, or if they're
Yes,
still around, they've morphed into insurance societies and so on.
yes.
It's actually quite it's actually quite fascinating to study that. And you know what, I this interview was a long time setting up because I've been trying to get in touch with you. I really appreciate what you've done today because you've really helped me kind of expand on some of the things I talked about in my segment on the woodmen of the world. So I really do appreciate that, and I understand. But I appreciate your time today, and all the best to you and the great work you're doing in preserving these things.
Well, thank you. I have a book coming out on Arkansas graveyards, and I spent a lot of time in my book talking about fraternal lodges and I hope, helping my reader identify when they find some unusual emblem so they'll be able to figure out what they're looking at. Especially if you're doing genealogy, it is important to know what great grandpa was a member of. You can learn a lot about somebody based
Yes,
on the lodges that they were in.
family history is yeah, and I so have you written any other books?
I have a book called Gone to the Grave, which is a book, it's a study of how people in the Arkansas Ozarks buried their own dead in an era before they were undertakers. So Gone to the Grave is set in the time before the Civil War up through World War II. And it goes into every aspect of death and burial. And so my new book, which is coming out in December, is simply it's boiled down to just it's a guidebook to Arkansas graveyards. So it's the entire state, uh, black, white, ethnic. Stories behind some of the unusual stones, including a couple of really good Woodmen of the World markers. We have one amazing one in Batesville, kind of a one of a kind. So I tell stories about the lodges because they played a very big part in people being able to have tombstones in some instances.
Well, where would one be able to purchase these books?
Gone to the Grave came out in 2014. It's in paperback. It was published by the University Press of Mississippi, which is an academic press. And my new book is also coming out with the University Press of Mississippi this coming December. And the title of that is Though Silent, They Speak. And of course, Though Silent, that's from the Woodsmen of the World. The Woodsmen of the World motto is Latin, but translates to "Though silent, he speaks," because a tombstone, though silent, is telling you something about the person's life. And so that became the title of this new book, which is, as I said, it's in production right now, but is scheduled to be published in December of this year.
Will it be available on Amazon?
Yes, they will. Yes, they are. You can buy them through the press, but they are also available on Amazon. That's true.
Okay, well, that's something that definitely I will enclose the link to that in the details section of this podcast.
Okay.
But
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Not a problem. I appreciate your time today, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate on some other projects going forward.
Oh, I would love that. If you were doing any kind of a podcast on other lodges, I do have a lot of information about some of the lodges that are gone, and I'm very interested in ones that were founded in Arkansas and have died out. So there are a couple of two that are gone, and one that's still nice talking to you, Stan.
Thank you, Abby. Have a good day.
Okay. Thanks.
That was Abby Burnett, brothers and sisters. She's deepening our knowledge of the Woodmen of the world. You know, the more I study these fraternal groups, and especially these defunct or these groups that have morphed into insurance companies and so on, and I study the rituals, I study the different costumes they use for those rituals. I study their secret work, and I'm like, why are we not as creative as those woodmen of the world? I mean, not just the headstones, the way she described the burial ceremony and all that. I mean, why are we not that creative anymore? Why do we not think on that level anymore? Because we just don't have time, or maybe we just got lazy. I don't understand it. I really don't. But I think it is, I think we do have to reach back somehow and recapture some of that. Wouldn't you not agree? Right? Another thing I learned from just speaking with Abby is that, you know, although she's not a member of any fraternal order, and she admits that, she's fascinated by them and has a wealth of knowledge about these different defunct fraternal orders. You know, something, you know, in other words, not all fraternal knowledge is learned inside of our lodges, brothers and sisters. It's not, right? I do want to have Abby back here on Points of Light Radio. As I said, you know, I want to collaborate with her on future projects that I want to do moving forward here. But that's all I have time for today, brothers and sisters. Before I go, first of all, I want to draw your attention to the PayPal link in the details section of this particular segment. Please go there, make a voluntary donation, and we will use that donation to help move Points of Light Radio forward. I also want to draw your attention to that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, let's recapture some of that ancient creativity. And until we meet again, just step into the light.